Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Tom Singer and Craig Brown.
Well, hello and welcome to, or welcome back to, the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you for coming along on the journey of this show that we designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Tom Singer, and I have the honor to be the co-host of this show, along with Craig Brown, an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hello, Craig. How are you today?
Hi, Tom. I'm great. Hey, it's always fun this time of year. The temperatures are moderating. The football is in full swing. And I think you're still having a heat wave, as I recall.
I was just going to say, maybe in Michigan, the temperatures are getting cool. In Austin, we're still seeing the high 90s, but we do have football in full swing. Hook 'em horns.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You guys are doing good.
Hey, each week here on this show, we try to bring interesting interviews and other ideas that will help all of the listeners enhance and grow their careers. And today's show, I'm excited because my friend Donna Kastner is joining us, and we're going to talk about what happens as you go through your career and you get closer to retirement. What options are there? How do you plan ahead? And she is an expert in this. She is the founder of Retirepreneur, and what she's doing is really cool stuff. Hey, Donna, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here.
No, we're glad to have you here. So I don't read big bios when we introduce our guests here. So could you please tell everybody kind of what your story is? What's your background and what is Retirepreneur?
Yeah, and I'll tell the fast one here because it's a patchwork quilt. First 5 years of my career, I was a high school band director. How's that for a startling start? Loved it, had a blast. And then it was the mid-'80s, and we started a family, and we were living in Jersey, and I took a year off from teaching to kind of figure out now what. Did the numbers, and what I would make as a teacher wasn't going to, it was barely going to cover what I needed for childcare. So I did what a lot of people would do, actually not. I bought an IBM PC Junior and I started a home-based business typesetting book manuscripts in New Jersey for some local publisher. And before I knew it, I recruited other work-at-home moms. I was making more than I ever did teaching and in a part-time capacity. The tricky thing is my husband, wonderful husband that I have, we relocated 9 more times after that. And so I kept reinventing. And the very thing that I think was a tricky dynamic earlier in my career actually teed me up for what I do today. I got to experiment. I got involved in writing, and then I moved to the events industry. I continue to do consulting in the events industry, but when I see a problem and I see that it needs to be solved, I kind of tend to charge a little ahead of most other people. And this retirement issue.
You're one of these people who go to where the puck is going, not
exactly. Yeah. And I can drive other people who live in the moment very crazy. So I'm self-aware. You don't get to this age and not be self-aware. So I could see this, our generation was the first to navigate through a fully self-funded retirement plan, unless you were lucky enough to have a pension, and fewer than 20% do today. And we are, as a generation, we weren't saving. So some folks are staying longer or reinventing this work and retirement because they have to. They want to bolster their nest egg, and others because they want to, because they love what they do. Either way, we're helping to clear a path to help them figure this out, to transition from traditional job to some kind of consulting gig, some kind of freelance gig where they're working longer, but in a more balanced capacity with leisure. Make sense?
Makes total sense.
Yeah, Donna, it's really nice to have you here. And I've read some of your material in the past few months. I think you and I both know Wendy, who helps us with the Digital Enterprise Society. And she knew I was going through this early retirement choice. So I left General Motors at the age of 61. And I wasn't planning to do that. I was planning to leave at 65. And I'm one of those people in the transition that you mentioned. I have a little pension, not a big pension.
Craig is doing
my wife and I did save.
Doing a really bad job of retiring. I've been alongside of him now for 6 months hosting this show, and he's not a good retiree.
So at the end of this, we're going to ask Donna if I'm a good retiree. Maybe she'll have a different view, Tom. But in any case, in reading some of the material you shared with Wendy, there are three topics that I think are worth mentioning. And let me start with the longevity economy. This point about how much money people need, how much longer are they going to live, and do you really not want to work in that? And so give us some of your key points about that.
Sure. Just to get some benchmarks here. So 1900, median age or lifespan was 47 years. By 2000, it was 77 years. So in a century, we gained 30 years. And they were projecting we're going to continue to gain more and more. So before, this next stage of retirement might have run, 10 years. Now it could run 30 years or more. And that's good news. We want to be happy about that. People have more attention to wellness. There's been medical advances, but who can fund 30 plus years? That's right. The tricky part. And that's, I think, the challenge that I saw. But so the longevity economy is creating this new life phase. And it's really funny, Craig, because I'll go to these expos where, first of all, senior citizen, I'm still not quite warming up to that tagline. I'll go to these boomer expos for people 50 and older, and I'll walk in on the trade show floor, and there's hearing aids and bathroom retrofitting, and it's all this stuff. And I'm like, wait, I'm not there yet. Right. I know I need to watch for that, but I think the longevity economy has created almost a new life segment that, after the full throttle run on your job, and then there's maybe a good 10 or 15 years when you might do something else in a more part-time capacity. And all the research is actually showing that staying engaged in some way, gradually dialing it down, not full throttle, is actually better for your health. It does contribute to longevity. When people are doing work they enjoy in a more leisurely manner, they live longer.
So we crafted the need for podcasts for the Digital Enterprise Society. And this is one of my little gigs. So I'm having a lot of fun with it, as Tom knows. We went through the first 20 really quickly. It's kind of interesting to me. I think one of the things that scares us all, at least it scared me, was would I be able to find anything else? Right now, sure. I ran a small company way back in my career, and then I joined a huge company, right? So the kind of the two ends of the spectrum. And I had hopes that I would find work, but I really wasn't sure. Is that a problem is it a self-imposed problem, or is it an industry problem, this notion of ageism?
It's real.
Okay.
It's real, and it's happening in different ways. And I'm not saying it's constant and it's happening in everybody's world, but it is, so for example, some people want to work till they're 65-ish or whatever, but for some people that decision is getting made for them. And they're being exited early. And I will predict that if and when the next economic downturn happens, let's think about it. People that have 30, 40 years of experience are highly compensated, and they are targets for layoffs. So yeah, sometimes these decisions are made for us. Sometimes the ageism happens. There's been a number of cases, like for example, Intel just laid off 11,000 people over the past year and a half. And they started to look at the segments that were being laid off, and the median age for the layoffs was closer to 50. The median age for the people that were keeping their jobs was closer to 40. That sets off alerts where it's like, okay, gang, are we being fair? Is age a factor? And by the way, as human beings, we have biases. Being aware of them is helpful, and leaning in to try to, manage them is important too. So I don't want to sit there and call everything ageism. We all have a responsibility to get in there and find those opportunities. But landing a full-time job in your late 50s, early 60s can be very difficult. And there are, I've watched things where I've seen interviews, man on the street and woman on the street interviews of millennials just saying, well, I think he's too old. I mean, who was I watching the other day? that said, they were talking about the presidential candidates, and they're like, well, I don't want these 60-year-old old guys. And I was like, 60?
Or a 79-year-old that just had a heart attack.
79 is one thing. In fact, I wrote a blog post about the 50 and older crowd, and a millennial was well-intended and tried to share it out there. And he thought it would be really good to put a GIF of Betty White with it. And I'm like, Betty White's 97. I was talking about 50.
Yeah, right.
So it just goes to show we all have, actually, ageism runs up and down the ladder. And I think we have to be careful of it. So
coach me for a second. How should I manage that? I'm 60, almost 2, and I have found a bit of work. These podcasts is one example. But frankly, I didn't need to. I'm lucky. I've got my healthcare figured out, right? So I didn't really need to worry about that. And yet I still have these kind of mental challenges or perspective challenges on, well, can I still work? Can I still compete? Can I even find a full-time job? I mean, what advice would you give me?
Let's talk about what you're doing right now, which I love. I mean, I got to think, and I don't know how familiar or not familiar you were with podcasts.
Completely unfamiliar. In fact, I probably was one of those old stodgy people that said, isn't that a waste of time? Right?
You know, so
I got my eyes open. Okay.
Your eyes are open. You had an open mind. You went, and guess what? Look at you now. You're a host.
And look at how fast he's learned. I mean, I've worked alongside him now for all of the shows. And, you know, if we go back to the first show afterwards, you know, there would be like little helpful advice along the way. Now I just sit back and say, Craig's great.
Yeah.
So I did that mostly because Wendy and I and the people that were at the transition of PLM World to Digital Enterprise Society want the Digital Enterprise Society to work. And I had some free time on my hands.
Right.
So what if you, I mean, you mentioned in your notes to me, that's an example of a small step. You know, are there other small steps that people like me should be taking?
Yeah, and I think they're going to look a little different from person to person. Another thing that I'm really big on in the retirepreneur arena, and I used it as a tool 20 years earlier when I was director of training at a large company, StrengthsFinder by Gallup. You know, they have identified 34 themes of strengths, and you take their assessment and they identify your top 5 strengths. And I have done that exercise with hundreds of people, mostly managers, and almost everyone comes back saying, you know, this was almost completely accurate, maybe 4 out of 5, and even the fifth one I got to think about. So I think it's really good at this point, at this juncture, as you're moving into this. If you do that assessment, it's $15 for the book on Amazon and the codes in the book. I don't think, Craig, there's going to be any surprises, but what I really like about what they do is they help you understand what your strengths look like in the context of others, how others, you know, when you're in a meeting, this is how you're perceived.
Yeah, I think that would be good to get an insight. I mean, Tom and I first met in Dallas, I think it was a few years ago, where I was asked to be a keynote speaker. And you know, I have learned over the years, I really enjoy speaking, right? But I don't know that would have been my first choice. So that's probably an obvious strength now, but I wouldn't have known that a few years ago.
So Donna, I think the StrengthsFinders is a fabulous advice for people of all ages. Should be
yes, I agree,
and looking at it. But you know, Craig asked the question from the standpoint of being in his early 60s. Hey, what should I be doing? Let's back it up a little bit, right? I'm in my early 50s. What should someone be doing maybe before they see that retirement line or that you know, early 60s sort of life changes in their career? What should we be doing if we're a little bit younger to prepare for that?
Yeah, and 50s is kind of the gateway to this whole mindset and process. And there's some people that are just like, I'll think about it later. I'll think about it later. And then one day they're retired and they're walking around in their bathrobe going, well, what am I going to do?
Yeah, mine wasn't walking. I was walking in and out of a long commute. And I'm like, I really can't do this anymore. And then they said, hey, we're looking for volunteers. And I was like, wow, that's an interesting opportunity.
So there you go. Sometimes the opportunity meets you. But I think, Tom, to your question, I honestly believe it's in your 50s that you start thinking about this. And because you are starting to embrace, you're more self-aware, you're knowing where you excel in. And I do think in this next life phase, it's important to stick to the swim lanes where you swim the fastest, because let's be completely honest, memory and speed ever so gradually decline as you get into your 60s. So let's make sure you're in a swim lane where you already can swim faster than the average Joe or Jane. And then the other thing is there is times to explore a little bit too. This, again, with technology, maybe there's something you want to try to do. Conquer your fears. I'm sitting here looking at a screen with you guys on Zoom, and had I done this a couple of years ago, I'd be like, eek. And now I encourage others. I'm like, okay, I know it freaks you out seeing yourself on the screen, but this is what's happening. This is the future of work. And the more people see you, the better they connect with you. And ideally, face-to-face is the best meeting. If you can't get that, a Zoom video call is not too bad as a second.
So that's a good point about another theme you brought up in the notes was about a side hustle. And I think I learned to use Zoom with another gig. They actually found me. They recruited me when they found out I was available. And it's the only way that company works. They got people across the United States. They're a startup. And it's been kind of interesting. So I guess I got 2 points. Expand on side hustles. But speaking from my experience, one just showed up when people found out I had time on my hands. So it's an interesting thing. I'd encourage everybody listening. You'd be surprised what shows up.
Well, and you said when people found out I had time on my hands, I'm going to say you got to think about your personal brand, and back even to Tom's question, but even now for you, Craig, your personal branding is important. So your presence on LinkedIn, becoming more discoverable there. I'm finding that publishing there is a tremendous way to and it surprises me as I travel where people I think have never seen this will say, here, I read an article you just wrote, and could you do this? So opportunities, that increases the likelihood that opportunities might come to you as you're being more vocal, not self-promoting, more the content management or, just the pushing helpful information out. I want to help the world. And I truly do. I mean, I want to help people. And in the process of doing that, some will find me and hire me.
Interesting. So the other term that I think I picked up from you was this notion of elder. And I wanted to talk about it a bit. I know a lot of people our age, you and I are close to the same age, might have a negative view of the term elder. I was pleasantly surprised this startup. So the marketing department's a bunch of 30-year-olds, one's 28. And I just asked them, I said, so what's your notion of a word elder? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? I was really surprised. They said, oh no, it's a great thing. It's somebody we can go to get insights about what to go do in this company that we started. So does that match your experience? Is the term elder a bad term or a good term?
I want to give credit where credit is due. So we're on a podcast. It's audio only, but I'm holding up a book cover here.
Okay.
And it's Chip Conley, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. If anyone is looking at this, I'm too young to be done, what's next for me, I highly recommend you take a look at this book because he chronicles his own journey. He started the second largest boutique hotel firm over the course of 20 some odd years. Then at age 52, he sold it. And he was invited to join Airbnb. And almost everyone was a millennial, and so was the CEO. And he suddenly found himself surrounded by people that, the conversations were different. And so he goes through this whole piece, but I think that for us, for our generation, for the 60s and older, you think about it in your 50s, and then in your 60s, you start to activate. And I think that we have to, dial down a little bit. We're not the know-it-all all the time. We know some things. And Craig, that's not your style and it's not mine, I hope. But We've been there where we have let me tell you, youngins, what business was like back in the day. We can't do that. Yeah. No pontificating. However, what Chip Conley found is when he was there, he recognized that there were things they knew that he didn't know, and there were things he knew that they didn't know. And he talked about this DQ, digital intelligence, which they knew much better than he did. Right. And then EQ, emotional intelligence. He saw them having tricky, challenges with communication dynamics. So over time, they built trust, much like we do in all relationships. And there was really good back and forth. And he came up with this, I think it's a two-way mentorship. So you guys just had a podcast, great tips on mentoring. But it's not just us. We're not the sage on the mountain, let me tell you. No. Listen, ask, tell them what they can help you with. Be vulnerable. I think that that's so important and it builds, it's a back and forth thing because the world's changing so fast.
Well, and I think that's, especially if you come from a large company, I think willingness to be vulnerable it's a really good point. It's scary, right? I mean, I just made this decision to not go into the office anymore. I don't get a paycheck from them anymore. And now you're asking me to go ahead and show my weaknesses. I mean, that's like really terrifying. So how do you help people when they're stuck there? I mean, they got to move on. They're too young to really stop working. And besides that, life gets boring if you don't do something.
Yeah, and let's talk about weaknesses, because a moment ago I talked about StrengthsFinder. And so one, it's embracing your top strengths, but understand your weaknesses will never be your strengths. You need to shore them up. You need to, we elders need to get more comfortable with technology, and some of us are. And by the way, that term elder, at a workshop when this book came out, I thought modern elder was much better than senior citizen. And
it is much better.
I was surprised. This group was kind of like, well, I don't know. I was like, well, what is it then? We need a name. So anyway, I digress. But I think we have to get comfortable, but understand your weaknesses will never be your strengths. That doesn't mean you can't do video, you can't do podcasts, you'll shore it up. To acceptable levels, you may discover a passion there or a surprise, and it does happen, but then tip back into the strengths. And by the way, technology is present in every strength. Technology unleashes things. It's not really a strength by itself. It's kind of embedded. So probably I'm going to bet that your communication and coaching skills and your presentation, you were talking about enjoying speaking, made this podcast learning curve more appealing. Because, okay, I'll figure out the technology because it's going to allow me to communicate with more people.
Well, and it helped that Tom and I knew each other. We'd been on the stage together at these annual events for the last couple of years. In fact, I still harass him about his sports car, but maybe I'll have to choose a new one. He's driving the wrong one.
Just because Craig worked for GM, I happen to be a Mustang guy. Go Ford.
Anyways, and now I don't care. I get to choose a new sports car, and I haven't chosen yet. But anyways, Donna, this has been a fascinating conversation, and we've talked a bit about our generation and things we need to look for on our strengths and know our weaknesses. What advice would you give the young generation? They've just started work. They're seeing these changes in the workplace. They are very tech savvy. They're on social networks all the time. But what advice would you give them looking at us?
Yeah, so the generations are not absolutes. They're clues, okay? So we have to be careful too much on the stereotyping, but there are tendencies, okay? And you do have boomers and millennials, two large and vocal generations, and in the middle are the Xers going, hey, what's going on here? And the Xers actually are moving into this quiet leadership role, and I'm fascinated watching that happen. So when you say the younger generations, keep in mind the millennials now, at least the older segment of them are 10 plus years in the working world. So they're starting to move into higher, they might have direct reports that are their mom or dad's age.
Right.
I think we have to be careful about stereotyping. Our human tendency is to want to be with our peeps, to be with like-minded people. So millennials hang with millennials and boomers hang with boomers. But guess what? The absolute best performance happens when you mix the generations, when you blend them. So be open. Be open to be surprised. Don't assume that every boomer is totally clueless on using their smartphone. And don't assume every millennial can't have a decent conversation. And Gen Z that's coming into the workplace, they, like 70% of them have said that they really appreciate face-to-face conversations. Which just thrills me.
Right.
And they're truly the first digital, it's almost like they've come full circle. I
think there's a few that I still interact with as a mentor. I think in fact, not only full circle, but they've come to realize how shallow it is, right? Just there's all these transactions that can occur in social media, but they're not deep at all. They're
right.
Very, very superficial. And so they love getting together one-on-one or in a small group because they can see all the other ways you communicate, your body language, your facial expressions, all these things, right? And full circle, it'll be interesting to see, the iPhone came out roughly 10 years ago, I guess 12 years ago now. And it changed a whole bunch of things. It'll be interesting to see what the next thing is that changes a whole bunch of things. But I would bet it'll go back to maybe things like Zoom, but being able to be very, very, very visual, not just, a phone call or a text message, right?
Right.
The 200-character text message is just really too artificial.
And remember, it's face to face. It's about the human interaction. So my advice to all generations, but especially to the younger generations, is get up and go talk to someone. You'll be surprised, and just build your network with really cool people.
So one of the things, Donna, we just touched on that is near and dear to my heart, and what I talk to when I get to go in and speak to companies and at conferences, is cross-generational networking.
Yeah.
So, like you said, you said it as clear as anyone I've ever heard, that, yeah, we're drawn towards people who are like us. It's the way we are as humans. But that diversity, whatever it is, and in this case, we're talking about the generations, makes us better. And so one of the things I talk about is, and we'd had that podcast a few weeks back about the importance of mentorship. So from the retirepreneur sort of framework, or your what you teach, how important do you think it is for these people as they get into their late 50s and 60s and into retirement to be engaged by mentoring younger people and just being mentored back?
Yeah, I think it's critically important, and it's not going to appeal to everybody. Another line I'll borrow from Chip Conley is, everybody gets older, some get elder. So if you're the crabby get off my lawn guy, you just go ahead. You just go there.
My lawn.
But if you're insanely curious and you want to help and you have a giving heart, guess what? You have know-how and know-who, and there's someone out there that can benefit, and then they can teach you. I love The Intern, that movie with Robert De Niro. It's just such a fun, frivolous, happy ending. But that's what I think we all want. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Well, you've hit on one other thing that I've learned in the past couple months, and it's the groups of people that are naturally curious, that want to go learn, not just, the technology or the thing that you're being employed to talk about, but also just curious, why do you think what you think? That is probably the thing that surprised me in the past 6 months, is just, I get a lot more energy, positive energy, from being in a group of curious folks than I do any other kind of group. And so
amen to that.
I'm glad you brought it up. And this has been a fascinating conversation. Tom, you got any other last comments?
No, I think it goes back to my personal motto, which has become, and only has become this in the last couple of years, is try new things. It's like, if we keep doing the same thing over and over as we get older, we're going to be put in a box. And
right.
I don't often.
So Tom, how's that Mustang box?
Do that.
Wait a minute. I got a question for Tom. Tom, how's that Mustang box treating you?
It's been a great box. It goes really fast.
Yeah. Okay. You need to broaden your horizons.
If the box has a 6-speed, then it's okay, Craig.
Okay, whatever.
But seriously, I think that's a core piece, Donna, of what you teach, is push yourself, get out of the comfort zone, right? So what's your last advice for everybody who's listening, no matter what generation they're in?
Yeah, don't be afraid. Push out of your comfort zone, but then don't just do it. And then and understand, once in a while you even might skin your knees. But you know what? Then take a look back and figure out what you just learned. I don't sit there and go, bring failure on so I can learn more. But if you take small bets and you get curious and you look around, you're going to be amazed at where you are a year from now.
So Donna, if somebody's listening to this podcast and they're like, this really rings home, maybe they're in one of those age groups where maybe that little gray hair is starting to appear, and this is something that concerns them, they're interested in it, and they want to find out more about you, your services, and all of the content that you've put out, how do people find you?
Come to retirepreneur.com. People say it's too hard to spell. If you can't MacGyver your way through this, you won't like our content. And the other thing is we're experimenting ourselves. We just launched a mighty network for retirepreneurs, and it's actually like a private social channel because we're finding this group is not as vocal publicly. Mm-hmm. And so now they're helping one another, and we're watching them pass along leads on opportunities, answer questions. We're just growing it. There's like 100 people in there. So it is very beta, early stage, but I think that's going to be the next chapter. But go to retirepreneur.com, subscribe to our newsletter, and my contact info is all over the place. Give me a holler.
Nice. Just search for Donna Kastner and you're going to find her and everything about Retirepreneur. Craig, any final thoughts?
No, this has been fabulous. A little bit different than what we typically do. And all all the generations, keep curious. It really does help.
And be nice. Be kind.
Gosh, Ellen said it the other day in a video.
Right.
Be kind to one another. And I thought, gosh, that should be a t-shirt.
There you go.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And thanks for always coming back to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Craig and I are having fun bringing you really important topics that are going to help you grow and enhance your career. So join us here next week for more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org.